I'd kind of like to start a little video submission on my part. It's Stephen Bankart's Zeitgeist Debunked. Jesus is not a copy of pagan gods. What am I supposed to seriously make of his resume of androcentric deities and historical personages? He kind of sums it all up with Horus to 4000 BCE, born of a virgin, star in the east, 12 disciples walked on water, crucified dead for 3 days. Dionysus, 1500 BCE, born on December the 25th, born of a virgin, water into wine, resurrected. Then you have Attis, 1200 BC, born on December the 25th, born of a virgin, crucified, dead for 3 days, and resurrected. Mithra called, very popular amongst military men, born on December 25th, born of a virgin, star in the east, 12 disciples, dead for 3 days, resurrected. Krishna, born of a virgin, star in the east, resurrected, son of carpenter, called Son of God. And then, of course, you have Jesus Christ himself. Now, working on that, what do I think of an ex-New Ager who has converted to Christianity and now seeks to debunk other religions? I think that this man was basically a Christian all along, and he was just looking for means and methods to missionize his core beliefs. Yeah. He kind of conveniently avoided the principle that these pagan beliefs are specific ones attributed to origins in the Bronze Age and were amalgamated in collected views. Yeah, of course, much of it is stolen, is a matter of conquest. The fact of these various cultures being involved in a gradual progression of colonization. But his take on things has a rather unjustified Christian candor. Yeah. Generally speaking, a man who so thoroughly focuses directly and specifically on male lore ignores a lot of the pagan heathen traditions that existed within Europe. Yeah. And Tacitus himself invented Christ to justify the adoption of Christianity as a justification for usurpacious male control from a deified central pontifect, a Roman Caesar. And aside from that, it's no mistake or coincidence that Romans validated often cruel and overzealous male authoritarians. Yeah. One does not have to fall into the rut of having to do sufficient research to debunk the men. Yeah. And obviously the figure of Christ was distinctly inspired by pagan deities, and that one cannot really describe or justify the fact that Jesus himself may have actually existed, because there's no real solid, tangible, physical proof. And I don't really like it when theories and hypotheses are combined or compared with belief structures. I find fact that most scholars believe Jesus existed to be a part of the existing status quo. I really have often wished Christianity would kind of pack its carpetbagger luggage and essentially move back to the Middle East where it actually belongs and nowhere else. His invention, well, let's put it this way, Tacitus's invention was part of a well-orchestrated political strategy to conquer and unify pagan European territory. Even though Europe didn't exist per se, we had, it didn't even exist in the form of provinces. It existed as tribal lands. And you have a messiah resembling local deities, and of course it would sit very well with the usually resistive local population. Rome was constantly looking for occupation and colonizer themes to justify the subjugation of people and create a kind of suitable yoke. Now, it's obvious to find this guy to be an obvious hypocrite, and that he used to believe in Jesus was apparently a myth about aliens and other things. Apparently he wasn't practicing what he was preaching, and when he had an out-of-the-body experience, a dark entity scared the hell out of him and made him run to Jesus. Well, also this guy is mostly using the Bible as his primary resource for historical events. He doesn't take into consideration that although one can view things in the historical imperative, the theological teachings combined as a compendium of individual texts by different people is hardly anything more than Bible studies, if you ask me. Yeah. And a person could just as well create a religion out of Mother Goose, and it would be less perilous, less vicious, and less confrontational. Yeah. Just another wishful Bible scholar for the poor and needy. Yes, New Age is often a gimmick to reconcile Christianity with naturalist spirituality. However, it doesn't work in either direction. Shamanism and heathen atavism is not Christian compatible, hence why he fled forward into the arms of his actual Christian fold. Yeah, particularly if not even really practicing it, and are just passing on the knowledge. One can do that quite well, and one doesn't have to engage in any thorough arguments. He has male validation issues. I say good luck to him with that. Jesus is, in my estimation, simply a respin of the same old Oedipal lore, King Oedipus. An angry god supposedly slays his only begotten son. So, in essence, to kind of culminate this and bring it into proper perspective, there's an interesting film. It's called The Shack. It's a film based on a book where God takes the image of a black woman. It stated a lot of controversy. A lot of Christians don't like it. After seeing this guy's review and reading others, I think, one could be well substantiated in buying all the books and the film too, because the distinction becomes a really unique one. Yeah. Jesus was basically being punished for being a deviant rabbi, and if it wasn't for the influence of medieval passion plays, I think the accusation that Jesus was a Jew would not hold water, except in the case of the betrayal by Judas. So, yeah, I'm kind of tired of all of this male-centered, boohoo, toxic male supplication in the name of bullshit, supposed goodness. Women simply don't do that sort of thing. Not in how they interact and not how they cogitate politically. Unless they have a serious screw loose, which won't happen, because often other women will probably succeed in stepping in and stopping the woman. That's how it functions. Obviously, he has issues with the pagan views on nature and how nature should be inviolate and sacred. Yeah, this is part of a constant, epic succession of men and their demonic male authoritarian deities. In terms of modernism, it holds quite a good credible comparison with fascism and psychopathic male behavior. Now we go on. The thing is, he used to argue for these nature religions, and now he betrays them. They brought him money and everything, and all of a sudden they are evil. Yeah. The spoiled, fragile ego male gets herniated and pulls the usual missionizing move of breaking porcelain. You know, a shared toy is no fun for the fragile male ego. So he comes up with this video on YouTube called The Shag Movie Exposed. Yeah, he was so excited. Guys like that need to be ignored to death. I mean, who really cares if this is not his God or the God of the Bible? Born again, Christian Bible thumperism. It's helping people, however. Yeah, it's helping people. How can it be bad? It's even helped people soften up to Christianity. He's basically an evangelical fundamentalist. Well, that's the thing. This guy is just dogmatic and parochially blinder than dog shit. I love the idea of God not being a white male, but rather a black woman, and not having the usual dickhead male issues. You know, like I say, yeah, fornicate Stephen Barkaz, ban cars. Oh my goodness, fornicate Stephen Bancars, and the stallion he rode in on. So he believes in original sin. You know, this guy is just your usual garden variety of misogynist too. Yeah. God being a black woman was the first thing he attacked. And he claimed that if God is to be personified, it should always be male. What pisses me off, yes, well, indirectly, I won't mention my friend's name, is that there are Christian women who agree with this. Yes, and they'll agree with it as blindly as they do. It's easier to not question things than to just try to rationalize them and move along. So he admits to being a fundamentalist Christian. Just from another one, why doesn't Jesus reveal himself? Reveal. Aha. So he's just another zealous religious despot. You know, I don't care what he thinks. I deeply value being in a consensual secular society. Fundamentalists don't want that allowed. They want to choose our choices for us. And that is where I seriously fight for those who deny the entirety of either the Bible, the Quran, the Talmud, the Torah, books written by human beings are not sacred in my estimation. The only thing that holds sincere and real value is nature. Only nature is sacred. He invalidates himself by being textually dogmatic and insisting in adherence to words written thousands of years ago, a kind of expectation that can only lead to irrational situations. Yes, that's pretty much it. He goes to the Bible and sees it as absolute authority. Pure perfection. The only reason he goes to other texts is to either debunk them or use them to debunk. This is the story of how he came to be a Christian. From New Age to Jesus. Yes, and that makes him an obsessive-compulsive OCD zealot. He kind of sooner needs psychotherapy to fix this particular brand of reality deficit. Yeah. For me, any religion that claims to be the absolute truth is lying, since that is not possible. And not only that, this individual became successfully richer just from writing these blogs. So much for the poverty of Christ. Yes, he's the trash man for those devout to a crusty religion and having little or no spirituality. I say good luck to that one. Yeah. Now there's this. I just read in the comment section from a female Christian that God is a black woman in the shack represents the goddess Papa Hanamuku, sometimes called Papa, the Earth Mother. I said yes. It's distinctly the term for Mother Earth, Earth Mother, in both Maori and Polynesian. She is the primogenitress. And Father Sky cannot even live without her. Yeah, the desert Semitic people denounced Mother Earth and elevated Father Sky to their absolute deity. In doing so, they deliberately defiled our globally collective sacred mother that existed at one time. Now, if you, well, yes, doesn't the sky end at the ozone layer? So if so, then they were right. Beyond that is the heavens. And, yeah, let's go on. Then you have, Ranganui is Father Sky. He would give his life for Mother Earth, by the way. They were close that they touched. Yeah, they touched physically. I mean, the sky and the earth meet directly. And it happened in a legend where, there was a time when things kind of grew out of control. The moral of the story is that men are up shit creek without women. But I personally don't really care for what specific desert cultures felt the rest of the world should feel or do in order to submit to a male god. Yeah. The problem is that they have greatly succeeded, and they have succeeded through brute force methods, not through the use of argument or reason. Not that one should even have to modify oneself according to the gospel written down by mere human beings that are basically nothing but people. They're not all seeing, they're not omniscient, they're not, and not only that, let's put it this way. When patriarchal religion stole the story of the tree of life, and turned it into the tree of knowledge, they kind of did that purposefully as a form of historical revisionism. I consider the following, like you take, for example, the murder of Jezebel, and I consider, for example, the original sin was the genocide of the priestesses and those at the temple of Baal. They turned the sacred tree of life into a special ritualized cult of initiated knowledge that basically excluded most people, whereas the original matriarchal basis was inclusive, and it was something where you could actually seek refuge. Yeah. So, yeah, I have problems with the Kabbalah too. Yeah. And as your original form of social scapegoating, and what I would call one of the earliest forms of witch hunting in its purest form, I would say, yeah, slighted as being priestesses of Baal, they were actually priestesses of Ashtoreth, and it was basically no different than any other fertility cult. You different names for the same thing. So yeah, they were made victims of male scapegoating. So this guy can take his dogmatically male-centered document of perdition and kind of transport it elsewhere. Sorry, yeah, but according to my original discussion with my friend, we cover a lot of topics like this. So yeah, he wrote this: God either willed the universe into existence, or the universe is a necessary creation that emanated from God. God either loves us or is indifferent to us. God is either an impersonal mechanistic entity or a personal thing. God either has an objective will for our lives or is indifferent to what we do. And God is either morally perfect or morally neutral. We may not know all the characteristics of God, but the point is that can't all be true. Some must be true and some must be false. Yes. Another aspect that is ignored is the postulation or the postulant of morality. Morality is basically not something that the Old Testament invented. Morality is a actual succession to the original concept of divine justice, and was basically stolen from Greek intellectuals. So I would not go so far as say that Christianity came up with much of anything of its own, and like with most conquering ideologies, it borrowed, if you can call it borrowed, intellectual property is the vehicle of our Judeo-Christian heritage that has kind of burdened us with the burden of proof. There's no acceptance for anything that is really divergent from plus, minus, positive, negative, yin, yang. It's this omnipresent, overlording duality of being, this characterization of the absolutes that I find troubling. Yes, I'm not going to go so far as to say that I hate dualistic thinking. I just find it kind of loathsome that men will seek to set limitations on what the divine is capable of through their reasoning. Cosmic existence is far more complex than simple-minded conjecture. Now, I'm not going to call it hypothesis or science either. Yes, we're talking about a classical condition of, what do they call it? Blocked reasoning. overcompensated by oversimplification each and every time. Our limited male-dominated religions are particularly septic and toxic. Duality, where we live in a universe with a supersymmetry. Simplistic, narrow, self-serving, patronizing, absolutely meaningless. It's this all or nothing easily equated with proto-Protestant or neo-Protestant or evangelical concepts like friend or foe. Either in sin or not in sin. It's all too basic. Yeah. The problem is that it is all so wrong, it almost defies gravity itself. Because let's view it in purely dynamic terms of symmetries, of causation, of the natural universe. We have Einstein's relativity theory, and we have the laws of quantum mechanics, the two groups of ideas that help define the universe in a sensible, logical, rational way. Now, because of supersymmetry, the choices we have are actually 2 exponent 16 exponent 16. He does not want to know what kind of number that basically is. Now, if you take something as simple, all things at the macrocosmic level start at the microscopic level. So let's take, for example, Brownian motion. You have air molecules moving around. Now, if you take this to a higher conjectural level of trying to describe it just in 8-dimensional space, you have motion that delineates a very smooth curve. That means you have nuances. You have things like secondary attributes that begin to appear into the realm of causation. Now, of course, these things are projections of our own psyche, because you can actually consider the universe as a world of experience of photons impinging upon receptors, and the brain just translating it to something that is capable of being understood by a conscious, thinking mind. Yeah. So basically, his arguments are scientifically unstructured, have no assigned methodologies for proof, and are intrinsically scientifically invalid. That is why there is also a natural skewed asymmetry between sexual expression and physical corporality of function. Like, the problem is where you have layering of attributes, and you have the fact that we have our primitive brain, we have the cerebrum, the parts for higher reasoning. In order for the secondary mechanisms to function, they have to at least modulate the effects of the lower operating human drives, urges, compulsions, the id. That's if you agree with Sigmund Freud's take on reality. I'm more a Jungian person myself. But yeah, without deviating, take simple binaries, exploding them well beyond the restrictions of any male Euclidean concepts. Yeah. All of this would, of course, be difficult for most to understand at first. His way is just the simple and easy way out. And that is why his form of thinking is so successful. Because humans are essentially two things. They are opportunistic, and they are essentially lazy. Because we're a biological life form, we suffer from two states. We have the state of excitation, and we have the state of relaxation or exhaustion. And the one regulates the other from launching through the whole time. Anything that goes beyond that nasty comfort zone is what I call the status quo. I slate that man up for being a dickhead. And we're up to our armpits in those type of people in this world. I seriously think that perhaps the problem is not so much the religion or the philosophy or the workings of this archetypically male androcentric positive of reality, but I honestly think that males are genetically defective. Yeah, there's been discussions about it. There's suspicions about it. There's the fact that paleontologists discuss things like genetic bottlenecks. So I'm not going to be apologetic for voicing this. Remember that I'm just a skeptic. I can change my mind if I'm presented with enough feasible data. But I really reject religion. I do. I mean, I can accept spirituality to a certain extent, but I really, really reject religion. Now, okay, when you observe nature and then look at human males, I get this gripping sense of what the hell is wrong with these guys? What is driving them to do these things? I mean, it's not as if, anybody asked them to do this or to behave this way. I seriously think that human males are genetically defective. Yeah, somewhere along the line something went wrong. There is no way in hell nature would create the human male in order to dominate and destroy centuries worth of life and evolution in a mere couple hundred years. There is something very wrong with the male sex. Yes, and aside from just blaming it on conspiracy theories or alien infiltration of our planet in order to have human males doing their dirty work of terraforming, I really love conspiracy theories. They're just as meaningless as Alex Jones talking on the internet. Like I could shoot myself when I have to hear some of the shit come out of him. I simply believe that during the last Earth calamity, there was a genetic bottleneck that created a propensity for Y chromosome damaged males to push themselves through, to gain the upper hand, to be able to collectively cut the deck and deal out the cards afresh. Men started developing a strategy of usurpation to not lose their fragile control, and thus the colonization through warfare, genetic assemblage, took hold. And I am dead serious in seeing this way. I call that disaster that started it the patriarchal sub-Saharan event. I added patriarchal to that because it's easy to say after the sub-Saharan event we had dire economic situations of famine. Obviously a lot of people died from it. Stuff really went, whatever civilizations we had were highly evolved at that time and kind of took the dip. Of course, there's also the theory of nurturing and socialization. Perhaps, that's the thing. The problem is we definitely have a society that has a flawed socialization of males. And I don't care what some fatherhood rights group says, in holding their breath or jumping up and down on their pulpit, the fact of the matter is, it's probably as subtle as being a combination of a whole bunch of, what do they call it, horrible, miserable situations culminating in a really disastrous situation. It happened in regions that were once lush green and turned them into deserts. The violent male god needed supplication to vent the usual fragile male ego. The thing is, I was discussing this. It has a lot to do with it has a lot to do with how men view their reproductive role, what's important for them in terms of reproductive success. Of course, they want to inseminate as many women as they want, and get them all pregnant and banged up and all that horrid stuff. But, I mean, the men took it upon themselves to gain economic advantage through slaying their more successful and productive neighbors. It was the male reproductive issues turning pathological. In other creations, in other creatures, let's put it this way, in other creatures, this sort of behavior is spotted and attacked. In humans, it somehow became a dominating attribute. Yes, I am trying to reconcile the several theories into one that at least makes sense and explains the misery that men have caused us for over the last 8,000 years, well into the Neolithic age. The problem is that the early agrarian society, out of need, was able to yoke and domesticate wild animals. But in the process of doing so, at the same time, the women that tried to domesticate originally became themselves victims of the changing division of labor and the changing division of social roles. Gradually, women became more and more excluded from sections, from aspects of social life that had been inherently theirs all along. Yeah. The Y gamete is much younger than the X gamete. But considering that the Y gamete is older than 150, 180,000 years, just barely, the predominance of one particular Y gamete only dates as far back as the Bronze Age. So between that period in the transition between Old and New Stone Age, and then the transition between New Stone Age and Bronze Age, you have two cataclysmic periods that kind of created a rift that led to us becoming as fucked up as we are now. Technological innovation is wonderful if it would have evolved less catastrophically, So that means that the new men systematically slaughtered off or displaced the old men. It's a reproductive substitution game. It's like the principle behind genocide in our modern political system. You take, for example, where a particular ethnic group wipes out the other and takes their place, simply replaces them, and then reproduces like crazy, and then takes over their natural habitat. That's the drive behind that type of genocide. It's this stupid, fascist, neo-Nazi rebirth of that fucking word I really hate called Lebensraum. I wish people would knock it off. It makes it seem quintessential that you can take a kind of neo-Darwinist idea and stretch it really thin to apply it to political science and this thing called male social engineering. Yeah. I cannot believe that all of the men were so fragile at the end of the Neolithic period that they just dropped dead when the environment turned hostile. I think that, as always, men helped turn a nightmare into an existing reality, and now we're stuck with it. When the Garden Eden turned into a barren wasteland, the new opportunists blamed this changing condition on their male counterparts. And of course, whatever projection of male deities they thought, oh, well, the female deities didn't do us any good, so fuck them. We're going to put our own gods up there where they belong. And to hell with everybody else. Blame each other for each other's environmental conditions. Find the scapegoat in human beings. You know? Somebody is always to blame when something goes wrong. You know, it's never going to be the way of how humans function to just simply blame themselves for being too stupid to know how to react properly when a catastrophe comes along. No, they got to find some kind of scapegoat, some poor pathetic schlep who doesn't have the power to retaliate socially and claim their own liberty. So there you go. And to do this sort of thing, there had to be some kind of pre-existing social favoritism that led to this topping from the bottom. Now, a social favoritism is always a very difficult to prove thing. How are they going to do it? There's probably through archaeological methods you could detect and catalog the change in cultural habits, because the men hijacked women's innovations and achievements and revised history to accord themselves the honor of being those that were evolved, and the women were degraded to the role of being vessels for the male sperm. There you have the history of conception reduced to absolute shards. A nice deception back then, but now genetics is unraveling this male psychopathy step by step, bit by bit. I seriously think, for example, looking historically at how the topping from the bottom and the winning of alliances for later male subjugation relied a lot on transsexual males. You know, the fact of that there are key individuals that are placed in between the sexes that don't look familiarly male or female, because you'll notice at the times of transition between the matriarchal, I wouldn't say matriarchal society, but matricentric influences to the patriarchal, absolute patriarchal societies, was one of neutralizing distinctions between the sexes. But to do it in such a way as to occupy female roles, rather than to celebrate gender obscurity, which would be a more natural thing. And in a more natural setting, gender obscurity could be attributed to something else. The only problem is that we have a distinction between two social groups that I will state here. You take, for example, in the Indian subcontinent, the hijras, the Indian form of transsexual, has absolutely nothing to do with the third sex type of people. The hijras are basically the remnants of a matrilineal influence, and the reason why Indian society scorns them and treats them so poorly is because, in essence, Indian society has changed in being a two-class society. That means the people from the old order were degraded, and the people that now call themselves the higher castes, in my estimation, are the patriarchal usurpers. And you know, you can easily see the difference in the different castes in India, because usually different ethnic groups belong to them. And that is why in Indian society there's this unspoken extreme racism between dark and light skin that I could for the life of me not understand. Yeah. Now, I will get very cutting. A rich male trans advocate a year ago revealed his intentions to me because he thought I would be agenda-friendly. But he also revealed his deep-seated antipathy towards towards women, without trying to paint it out the way I saw it, by asking very precise and gnawing questions. Yeah. He exposed his extreme internalized misogyny and vagina envy. Now, it is curious, just almost like a stereotypical, like a film being played. What's he could do? He divorces his wife. He fights her for custody. He more or less prevents her from having any material gain. She only had material loss through the divorce. And then he says, well, maybe I'm more attracted to guys. And I've had to hide my true self all these years. But, I fear that in this Latin American society, nobody will really understand me properly. Like, I was flabbergasted because I don't like it when people are not honest with me. I don't feel properly male at the best of times, but I don't feel like the jackass whisperer trying to call the pot the kettle. To me, transgenderism, as it's coalescing in the Western world, is a refuge for male privilege. Yeah. Now, I see the divisive difference. You see, what I find appalling is how transgenderism has the atrocity and the audacity to claim Hijduraism for its own. They actually claim to call themselves Hijras. The thing is, being a Hijra is an act of devotion to a female deity. And they sacrifice their manhood to become more like the goddess, to become more woman-like, because in praise of this woman-like, they feel that it is an accomplishment, an achievement. They look at women as role models. And that, in a society that is extremely patriarchal and views women as lesser, and it is, nobody can tell me with full honesty that these men really are willing to put women on a pedestal. When I look at the Indian film industry, when I look at the kitschified Bollywood trash that is so full of soapy emotions and so full of contradictions, I begin to wonder what's going on. Yes, the thing is that the ability to entice men to willingly go over and side with the patriarchy did not work in India. So they had to create a caste system to subjugate the matrilineal matriarchy, devoted male influence, catering to women. That's the way the patriarchy views it. Since women in India, for the longest time, have been more or less subject to the whims of men, look at the widow burning, look at the dowry, look at all of that. These are things, these are constructs inserted. All of this is like a house of cards, patriarchy does not want men to cut their dicks off to serve women. And I have never heard of any kind of quote-unquote feminist ideology that has demanded casualties and caused deaths. It just doesn't happen all across the board. It's the male androcentric principle that takes lives and causes death and destruction wherever you look in human history. I am gradually figuring out how extremely fucked up this mess is. That is also why, for example, Rome banished Saturnalia, because the guys that were worshipping Astarte were chopping the jewels off, plus the women were allowed to have fun at the expense of men. You can't have that type of thing going on while men are trying to run the show, so the men just couldn't handle the jandal. After all, it was a set of cults that were really much more ancient than the sophistry of the Roman Republic, dating well before what the desert religions even had to say, and eventually becoming these guaranteed bona fide state religions. You know, I mean, the Holy Roman Empire lasted right until the middle of the 19th century, and it had to be more or less ended with an edict. I mean, that is really pathetic. That is sad beyond belief. You know, so yeah. The status quo secretly it doesn't secret. It invalidates women, but there's a passive aggression underneath all of that. You know, like it's easy to hate women and treat them like shit and call them a Jezebel or compare them with Julia, daughter of you know, I mean, all that stuff throughout history, you know, preventing women from riding horses. They have to wear certain outfits and ride side saddle. They have to blah, blah, blah. You know, I mean, like, give me a break. Yeah. So you end up with specific societies that did not dance along with the patriarchy, having trans women that were treated like untouchables, like absolute shit, because they actually venerate women and being of service to the goddess. Like, I mean, give me a break. I suspect that this turn of fate happened because India was different than elsewhere. The women of the Indian subcontinent were not ones to hand out merits to men unless they became more like women, and that is why they have the goddess Kali. They were not so foolish as to make concessions to hand tribal chiefdom to men, or honor warriors and make them the big fucking hokum balokum and all that other rubbish. So that's where Kali came from. And of course your average Indian male is just an asshole from an invading culture. Brahmins are assholes, let's face it. The whole upper class are assholes too. I like saying that, and I don't care how pretty the poetry is and how the flowers are. I don't care about the Mughal influences. You know, I mean, let's face it. If I'm going to have friends from India, they might as well be from the Indian lower caste. Because you won't catch a higher caste Indian male agreeing with anything that I'm saying here. And not only that, their whiteness comes out very clear when they talk. You can hear it. It's not a conjecture, you know. I don't call racism colorism, because to me racism is racism. They can paint it purple, they can park a donkey in it, I don't care. I was shocked to hell. The myth about India is really a myth. The invaders could not eliminate the loyalties that the men had towards women. That's it. That's all there is to it. And the loyals become the usurped. That's the usual thing. Not only that, I like how the crossover occurred between Kali and Durga. It's very nice. I'm not into this Shiva and Rama shit, and I don't give a flying fuck about generals on chariots, you know, flaming through the skies. I don't really care about all that chest-pounding heroic principles and all that dogmatic rubbish. You know, I can't deal with it. With all the shit going on in that country concerns rape, it seems too good to be true. Yeah. I am aware of the Hijra. The trans community often uses them in their rhetoric. Very interesting. Yeah, but that's the way it is. So, summing this all up, I covered probably topics that are vastly separate and have very little in common with one another. But what can I do? You know, I got a bit of sunburn. Sorry about that. Anyway, thank you for allowing me to have this little discussion, and I hope you found it a bit edifying. I'm sorry. You know, I don't consider myself so special that what I say should have impact. But, you know, I mean, I had to say it. You know, somebody has to say it. I don't really give a hell. Hell's half acre, who says it. But, you know, it had to be said. Anyway, have a very lovely Sunday. Take care. Bye-bye.